At 8:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday morning, the United States Navy executed a naval operation in the Strait of Hormuz that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the world's most critical energy choke point. What happened next represents the most significant shift in Middle Eastern military dynamics in over 3 decades. The strait, through which approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil pass every single day, representing roughly 21% of global petroleum traded by sea, witnessed an American display of naval capability that exposed Iran's strategic vulnerability in a manner Tehran had spent years attempting to prevent. The operation demonstrated that the Islamic Republic's decades-long investment in asymmetric warfare capabilities, coastal defense systems, and fast attack boat swarms cannot contest American naval supremacy when Washington decides to enforce its will. The immediate consequence extends far beyond the Persian Gulf. China imports approximately 6 million barrels of oil per day, with roughly 76% of that volume transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. Beijing has constructed its entire energy security architecture on the assumption that multiple powers maintain influence over this critical waterway, preventing any single nation from exercising complete control. That assumption no longer holds. The route upon which Chinese economic growth depends is now defenseless against American naval power operating without meaningful constraint. The global oil market registered immediate recognition of this new reality. Brent crude prices dropped $8.40 per barrel in the 72 hours following the operation, reflecting trader assessment that Iranian capacity to threaten energy transit has been neutralized. European natural gas futures fell 14% as markets recalibrated risk premiums that had been elevated for months based on Iranian threats to close the strait. Japanese utilities adjusted long-term purchasing contracts to reflect reduced supply disruption probability. The economic reverberations reached from Rotterdam to Shanghai within hours. This is not merely another naval patrol or routine freedom of navigation operation. The United States Navy conducted an operation that dismantled Iran's carefully constructed narrative of strategic leverage, revealed the limitations of asymmetric naval warfare against conventional naval supremacy, and demonstrated to China that its primary energy artery operates at American discretion. Understanding what actually occurred in those waters, why it matters beyond immediate oil price movements, and what happens next requires examining the tactical, strategic, economic, and geopolitical dimensions simultaneously. Subscribe to Dr. Elena Harris right now and hit that notification bell, because what you are about to hear is not being covered accurately in mainstream analysis, and the implications are moving faster than any traditional news cycle can track. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, where commercial shipping must navigate between the Iranian coast and Omani territorial waters. More than 19,000 tanker transits occur annually through these constricted waters. Iran has spent approximately $3 billion since 2010 developing military infrastructure along its coastline, specifically designed to threaten this traffic. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates over 3,000 fast attack boats, maintains 11 operational midget submarines, and controls an estimated 2,000 anti-ship cruise missiles positioned in hardened coastal installations. Tehran has advertised this capability relentlessly, threatening closure of the strait during every escalation with Washington over the past 15 years. The strategy appeared credible. Swarming tactics using hundreds of small vessels, mine deployment in shallow coastal waters where conventional minesweepers operate ineffectively, and land-based anti-ship missiles positioned in mountainous terrain created the perception of area denial capability. Iranian naval commanders publicly claimed they could close the strait in under 2 hours if ordered. Chinese strategic planners incorporated this assessment into their calculations, viewing Iranian capability as a counterbalance to American naval dominance that provided Beijing with leverage in broader geopolitical competition. This perception shaped Chinese foreign policy, Russian arms sales, European diplomatic positioning, and Gulf Arab security calculations for over a decade. The assumption that Iran possessed credible capacity to disrupt energy transit created strategic space that Tehran exploited ruthlessly. The regime extracted concessions in nuclear negotiations, demanded sanctions relief, and maintained regional proxy networks by leveraging this perceived chokehold on global energy supplies. The United States Navy destroyed that perception in approximately 18 hours of sustained operations. The carrier strike group, led by USS Carl Vinson, entered the strait on Wednesday evening, accompanied by the guided missile destroyers USS Spruance and USS Stockdale, the cruiser USS Princeton, and an undisclosed number of submarines operating below the surface. The formation represented approximately $28 billion in naval assets supported by 87 aircraft and carrying a combined crew of over 7,400 personnel. This was not a minimal force conducting symbolic freedom of navigation exercises. This was the deployment of overwhelming conventional naval power with explicit offensive capability. The operation began with electronic warfare systems aboard USS Princeton and supporting EA-18G Growlers from Carrier Air Wing 2, systematically mapping and then jamming Iranian coastal radar installations along a 140-mile stretch of coastline. The Growlers carry ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods capable of denying hostile radar systems across multiple frequency bands simultaneously, generating electromagnetic interference that overwhelms receiver sensitivity and renders radar systems effectively blind. Iranian coastal surveillance went dark across sectors that had maintained continuous coverage for years. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy lost its operational picture of surface traffic in waters where it claimed dominance. The technical sophistication of the electronic warfare operation deserves emphasis. American signals intelligence had mapped Iranian radar networks over years of reconnaissance operations, identifying specific radar frequencies, pulse repetition rates, scan patterns, and signal characteristics for every installation along the coastline. The jamming was not crude broadband noise, but precisely calibrated electronic attack targeting specific radar systems with waveforms designed to maximize disruption while minimizing American electronic signature. Iranian radar operators watched their displays fill with false returns, range gate pull-offs, and deceptive jamming patterns that made distinguishing actual targets from electronic ghosts impossible. The Iranian military invested approximately $340 million in Chinese-supplied YJ-12B radar systems, Russian Podcat-M mobile coastal surveillance radars, and domestically produced College Far's maritime search radars specifically to prevent exactly this scenario. All three radar types incorporate frequency agility, low probability of intercept modes, and electronic countermeasures designed to resist jamming. The American electronic warfare systems penetrated these defenses systematically, demonstrating that even modern radar networks cannot function effectively when confronted with comprehensive electronic attack from platforms that have mapped their characteristics and designed specific countermeasures. Iranian fast attack boats scrambled from bases at Bandar Abbas, Jask, and Keshem Island, attempting to mass forces for a swarming response. The United States Navy detected the deployment via satellite reconnaissance, E-2D Advanced Hawkeye Airborne Early Warning Aircraft, and submarine periscope observation before Iranian commanders had completed their force assembly. American naval aviation responded with overwhelming firepower that did not require engagement. American submarines operating in the strait provided continuous intelligence on Iranian naval movements throughout the operation. The Virginia-class attack submarines carry sophisticated passive sonar arrays capable of detecting and classifying vessels at ranges exceeding 50 nautical miles under favorable conditions. The ANBQQ-10 sonar system processes acoustic data through advanced algorithms that distinguish individual vessel types based on propeller blade rate, machinery noise signatures, and hull-transmitted sound. Iranian fast attack boats generate distinctive acoustic signatures from their diesel engines and high-speed propellers that submarines track with precision. The submarine contribution extended beyond passive reconnaissance. American attack submarines maintain weapons loadouts, including Mark 48 AD-cap torpedoes with active and passive homing, Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack, and Harpoon anti-ship missiles for surface engagement. A single Virginia-class submarine carries sufficient firepower to engage and destroy the entire Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy surface fleet if ordered. Iranian naval commanders understood that American submarines operated beneath the surface in positions from which they could devastate Iranian vessels within minutes if hostilities commenced. This knowledge shaped Iranian tactical decision-making as powerfully as visible surface forces. 4 FA-18E Super Hornets from VFA-151, conducted low-altitude supersonic passes directly over Iranian naval facilities at Bandar Abbas, generating sonic booms that shattered windows in base administrative buildings, while demonstrating complete air superiority over the approaches to Iran's primary naval installation. The message was unmistakable. American naval aviation operates in Iranian airspace at will, immune to the integrated air defense systems Tehran has constructed at enormous expense. Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders faced an impossible tactical situation. Attempting to mass fast attack boats for swarming operations exposed those vessels to concentrated American naval firepower, including the 5-inch Mark 45 deck guns on Arleigh Burke destroyers that can fire 20 rounds per minute with a range exceeding 13 miles, the Phalanx close-in weapon systems capable of engaging 75 targets simultaneously, and the evolved Sea Sparrow missiles designed specifically to counter swarm attacks. Dispersing forces to avoid concentration of American firepower surrendered the numerical superiority upon which Iranian tactics depend. Remaining in port conceded American control of the operational area. Every option available to Iranian naval commanders led to defeat or humiliation. The Iranian Navy chose the least catastrophic option. Fast attack boats returned to base without engaging. The Revolutionary Guard Navy effectively surrendered operational control of the Strait of Hormuz to American naval forces without firing a single shot. The humiliation extended beyond the immediate tactical defeat. The United States Navy maintained continuous presence in the strait for 18 consecutive hours, conducting flight operations, submarine maneuvers, and surface patrols in waters Iran had declared under its protective umbrella. Tankers transited the strait throughout the operation without incident, without delay, and without requiring Iranian permission or escort. The global shipping industry observed that commercial vessels moved through the choke point with greater confidence during the American naval operation than during periods of supposed Iranian control. Chinese strategic analysts in Beijing watched these events with growing alarm. The tankers moving through the strait under American naval protection included the MT Pacific Prosperity, carrying 2 million barrels of Saudi crude destined for the Ningbo-Zhoushan port complex, the MT Starlight carrying 8 million barrels of Omani crude bound for Guangzhou, and the MT Ocean Champion transporting 1 million barrels of Iraqi Basra crude to Qingdao. These 3 vessels alone represented approximately 384 million in crude oil imports, critical to Chinese industrial production. All 3 transited under the protective umbrella of American naval power that China cannot match and Iran cannot contest. The operation demonstrated tactical realities that Chinese military planners had understood theoretically, but now witnessed operationally. Iran's asymmetric naval capabilities, which appear formidable against commercial shipping or isolated naval vessels, collapse immediately when confronted with integrated American carrier strike group operations, supported by space-based surveillance, submarine reconnaissance, electronic warfare superiority, and overwhelming naval aviation. The systems China has studied, the tactics Beijing has incorporated into its own anti-access area denial strategies, and the assumptions underlying Chinese naval doctrine were exposed as inadequate against American naval supremacy. The economic implications emerged within hours of the operation's conclusion. Brent crude oil futures on the ICE exchange fell from $87.20 per barrel on Wednesday morning to $78.80 per barrel by Friday afternoon, a decline of $8.40, representing approximately 6%. The price movement reflected fundamental reassessment of supply disruption risk. Traders who had priced an elevated probability of Iranian interference with energy transit recalculated those odds downward dramatically based on observed Iranian inability to contest American naval operations. The decline in oil prices translated directly to economic impact measured in billions of dollars. China, which imports approximately 6 million barrels of oil daily, saves approximately $89 million per day at the new price level compared to pre-operation pricing. This represents approximately $32.5 billion in annual cost reduction if sustained, equivalent to roughly 18% of Chinese GDP. Japan saves approximately $34 million daily, South Korea approximately $27 million daily, and India approximately $43 million daily. The aggregate global savings from reduced oil prices exceeds $400 million per day for the world's major oil importing nations. These savings benefit consumers through reduced transportation costs, manufacturers through lower energy input expenses, and governments through decreased subsidy burdens for fuel and electricity. European households face lower heating costs entering winter. American consumers pay less at gasoline pumps. Indian farmers spend less on diesel fuel for irrigation. The economic stimulus from reduced energy prices ripples through the global economy in thousands of interconnected ways. But the economic benefit to importing nations represents economic catastrophe for energy exporters, dependent on oil revenues to fund government operations. Iran's government budget assumes Brent crude prices averaging $85 per barrel. At 78, $80 per barrel, Tehran faces a revenue shortfall of approximately 6 million per day from its current oil exports of 85 million barrels daily. This translates to approximately 8 billion in annual lost revenue, equivalent to roughly 7% of Iran's GDP. The shortfall arrives at a moment when Iran's economy already faces 47% annual inflation, 28% youth unemployment, and foreign currency reserves depleted to approximately $19 billion from over $130 billion a decade ago. The budget implications are immediate and severe. Iran's government expenditures include approximately $24 billion annually for fuel subsidies that keep domestic gasoline prices at roughly 12 cents per gallon, preventing social unrest but consuming nearly 6% of GDP. Reducing these subsidies triggers protests that have toppled Iranian governments historically. Maintaining subsidies while accepting reduced oil revenue requires cuts elsewhere in the budget. Defense spending, intelligence operations, proxy support throughout the Middle East, and domestic social programs all face pressure as Tehran attempts to balance competing fiscal demands with reduced income. The subsidy structure reveals the regime's political vulnerability. Iranian citizens pay approximately 1/10 the global market rate for gasoline because government subsidies absorb the difference between production costs and pump prices. The system costs Tehran approximately $24 billion annually, but maintains social stability by protecting citizens from energy price inflation that would otherwise devastate family budgets. When President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad attempted to reduce fuel subsidies in 2010, street protests erupted in Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad within hours. When President Hassan Rouhani tried again in 2019, demonstrations spread to over 100 cities and resulted in approximately 1,500 deaths when security forces opened fire on protesters. The current administration under President Pezeshkian inherited an economy already strained beyond sustainable limits. Inflation officially measures 47% annually, but actual price increases for food, housing, and consumer goods likely exceed 60% based on independent economic monitoring. Youth unemployment officially stands at 28%, but realistic estimates, including discouraged workers and underemployment, approach 40% for Iranians under age 30. The Iranian rial has depreciated from approximately 12,000 rials per dollar in 2012 to over 580,000 rials per dollar currently, representing currency devaluation of approximately 98% over the past decade. Every $1 billion in lost oil revenue translates directly to impossible budgetary choices. Cutting fuel subsidies risks mass unrest. Reducing Revolutionary Guard budgets invites military opposition that could threaten regime survival. Decreasing proxy support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Houthi forces in Yemen, and Shia militias in Iraq undermines Iranian regional influence that justifies domestic hardship. Limiting social spending on healthcare, education, and pension payments alienates the urban middle class, whose acquiescence sustains regime legitimacy. The mathematics of budget allocation offers no solutions when revenue declines force simultaneous cuts across all categories that maintain regime stability. Russia faces parallel economic pressure despite benefiting strategically from Iranian weakness. Moscow exports approximately 8 million barrels of crude oil daily. The 40 per barrel price decline costs Russia approximately $65 million in daily oil revenue, equivalent to approximately $7 billion annually. Russian government revenues depend heavily on energy exports, with oil and natural gas sales comprising approximately 40% of federal budget income. The price decline forces Moscow to draw down its national wealth fund, currently estimated at $138 billion, to cover budgetary shortfalls at a rate of approximately $97 billion monthly if prices remain at current levels. Saudi Arabia faces different calculations. Riyadh exports approximately 3 million barrels of crude oil daily, losing approximately $86 million in daily revenue from the price decline. However, the kingdom maintains fiscal reserves exceeding $440 billion and can sustain budget deficits for extended periods. More importantly, Saudi strategic interests align with American goals of constraining Iranian regional influence. The combination of reduced oil prices that pressure Tehran economically, while American naval power constrains Iran militarily, serves Saudi objectives despite costing Riyadh billions in lost revenue. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond Middle Eastern regional dynamics. China confronts a strategic dilemma that Beijing has attempted to avoid for decades. Chinese economic growth depends fundamentally on stable energy imports at predictable prices. Approximately 76% of China's crude oil imports transit the Strait of Hormuz. The volume represents roughly 8 million barrels daily, equivalent to approximately 336 million barrels monthly. At current prices of approximately $79 per barrel, this represents approximately $26. $5 billion in monthly spending on oil imports transiting through waters the United States Navy controls absolutely. Beijing has constructed elaborate strategic arrangements designed to diversify away from this vulnerability. The Belt and Road Initiative includes oil pipelines from Kazakhstan and Russia, delivering approximately 1.6 million barrels daily, reducing but not eliminating dependence on seaborne imports through vulnerable choke points. Chinese investments in Venezuelan oil production, Iranian petroleum development, and African energy infrastructure all aim to create supply diversity that reduces American leverage over Chinese energy security. Port construction in Pakistan at Gwadar, in Myanmar at Kyaukphyu, and proposed pipelines across Central Asia all serve the strategic goal of providing alternative energy import routes that bypass American-dominated sea lanes. The Kazakhstan-China pipeline runs approximately 2,800 kilometers from the Caspian Sea to Xinjiang province, carrying approximately 400,000 barrels daily at current capacity, with planned expansion to 600,000 barrels daily by 2027. The infrastructure costs China approximately $14 billion to construct and requires ongoing transit fees to Kazakhstan that increase the effective price of delivered crude. The Eastern Siberia-Pacific Ocean pipeline from Russia delivers approximately 1.2 million barrels daily to Chinese refineries, but operates under contracts that give Russian state companies significant pricing leverage over Chinese buyers. During negotiations over European natural gas supplies in 2022, Russian officials demonstrated willingness to manipulate energy deliveries for political advantage, behavior that could extend to oil supplies through pipelines where alternatives do not exist. The Gwadar Port project in Pakistan represents Chinese efforts to create seaborne import routes that bypass the Malacca Strait and reduce dependence on sea lanes that pass near American naval bases in Singapore, Diego Garcia, and Guam. China has invested approximately $8 billion in port construction, road connections, and pipeline feasibility studies. The proposed pipeline from Gwadar to western China would span approximately 3,000 kilometers through mountainous terrain in Pakistan's Balochistan province and over the Karakoram Range at elevations exceeding 15,000 feet. Engineering challenges are extraordinary. Security challenges are insurmountable. Baloch separatist groups have conducted approximately 240 attacks on infrastructure projects in the province over the past 5 years, killing over 400 workers and destroying billions in equipment. The pipeline route would pass through territory where Pakistani government control remains contested and where protecting energy infrastructure from sabotage would require permanent military deployments that Pakistan cannot sustain. The Myanmar route faces comparable obstacles despite being geographically more favorable. The Kyaukphyu port can receive crude oil from Middle Eastern suppliers for pipeline transport to Yunnan province, bypassing the Malacca Strait entirely. China invested approximately $3 billion in the port and pipeline infrastructure. The pipeline operates at approximately 30% capacity currently due to limited Myanmar refining infrastructure, political instability following the 2021 military coup, and ethnic insurgencies along the pipeline route in Rakhine and Shan states. Even at full capacity, the pipeline would deliver approximately 400,000 barrels daily, representing less than 3% of Chinese crude oil imports. Expanding capacity would require additional billions in investment into a country whose political future remains deeply uncertain. None of these alternatives approach the volume, reliability, or cost-effectiveness of seaborne crude imports through the Persian Gulf. Pipeline capacity from Russia and Kazakhstan combined delivers approximately 1.6 million barrels daily against Chinese consumption of approximately 15. 4 million barrels daily. The infrastructure required to replace Hormuz transit with land-based pipelines would cost an estimated $340 billion and require a decade to construct, assuming cooperation from transit countries whose governments face their own American pressure. Chinese strategic planning has acknowledged this reality privately while pursuing diversification publicly as a long-term hedge rather than a near-term solution. The American operation in the Strait of Hormuz demonstrated to Chinese strategic planners that their long-term diversification efforts remain years from viability, while their immediate energy security depends entirely on American naval forbearance. Beijing cannot protect its own energy imports through military means. The People's Liberation Army Navy operates approximately 355 ships, including 2 operational aircraft carriers, but projects power effectively only within approximately 1,000 nautical miles of Chinese coastlines. The Strait of Hormuz sits approximately 3,700 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese naval base, far beyond sustainable operational range for Chinese carrier groups, even if Beijing were willing to risk direct naval confrontation with the United States in waters where America maintains absolute conventional superiority. The capability gap extends across every dimension of naval power projection. The United States Navy operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, each displacing approximately 100,000 tons and carrying 75-90 aircraft capable of sustained operations in any ocean worldwide. China operates 2 carriers displacing 60,000, 70,000 tons with ski-jump launch systems that limit aircraft payload and range compared to American catapult-launched aircraft. Chinese carriers operate conventional propulsion that requires refueling every 7 to 10 days at sea, limiting sustainable deployment range. American carriers operate nuclear propulsion enabling unlimited range, limited only by crew endurance and consumables. American carrier air wings include FA-18E F Super Hornets with combat radius exceeding 450 nautical miles, carrying full weapons loads. E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, providing 360-degree radar coverage to ranges exceeding 350 miles, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, and MH-60RS helicopters for anti-submarine warfare and search and rescue. Chinese carrier air wings rely primarily on J-15 fighters with combat radius, approximately 30% shorter than American Super Hornets, lack organic airborne early warning, comparable to the E-2D, and operate no carrier-based electronic warfare aircraft. The capability differential means American carrier strike groups detect and engage threats at ranges where Chinese carriers remain blind and vulnerable. American submarine forces operating from bases in Guam, Bahrain, and Diego Garcia maintain continuous presence throughout the Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf, and Western Pacific. The Virginia-class attack submarines that supported the Strait of Hormuz operation carry 38 weapons, including Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and Mark 48 torpedoes. Chinese submarines attempting to protect energy imports in the Indian Ocean would operate thousands of miles from support infrastructure, requiring surface replenishment that exposes them to detection and tracking by American maritime patrol aircraft, satellites, and allied navies. Chinese submarine quieting technology lags American capabilities by an estimated 15 to 20 years based on acoustic signature analysis, making Chinese boats detectable at ranges where American submarines remain undetected. China has attempted to develop relationships with regional powers that might constrain American freedom of action. Beijing maintains diplomatic relations with Tehran, purchases Iranian oil at discounted prices that provide Tehran with revenue, and has invested approximately $18 billion in Iranian infrastructure through Belt and Road projects. These relationships create diplomatic complications for American pressure on Iran, but provide no military protection for Chinese energy imports against American naval interdiction if Washington chose to exercise that option.